By the early 1960s, Sammy Davis Jr. was the most electrifying performer in America. He could sing like a man who had lived 10 lifetimes. He could dance until the floor itself seemed to move. He could do impressions, play instruments, and command a stage with nothing but his presence and a single spotlight. And yet, every single night, after the applause died down and the audience filed out into the warm Nevada air, Sammy Davis Jr. was not allowed to sleep in the hotel where he had just brought the house down. He had to leave through the back, stay somewhere else, somewhere lesser. And here is the question that will stay with you through this entire story. How does a man spend his whole life giving everything he has to an audience that loves him, while the very industry built on his talent refuses to see him as an equal? And what did carrying that weight every single day finally do to him? To answer that, we have to go back to the very beginning. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to Harlem in the late 1920s. Sammy Davis Jr. was born in December of 1925, the son of a vaudeville dancer and a chorus girl. He grew up not in a schoolroom, but on a stage. By the time most children were learning to read, Sammy was already performing part of the Will Maston trio alongside his father and his adopted uncle, a man he called his guardian and mentor. If you were in your late 30s or 40s when the Rat Pack was at its peak, you may remember seeing Sammy on television and thinking, how does one person do all of that? The dancing, the singing, the comedy, the impressions, all of it seamlessly, as if performing were simply the way he breathed. But what most audiences never saw was the America that existed just offstage. This was Jim Crow America. Segregated hotels, segregated restaurants. A country that would pay a black man to entertain them and then refuse to let him eat at their table. Sammy Davis Jr. navigated that world from childhood. He learned early that talent was not enough, that excellence was not a shield, that no matter how many standing ovations he received, the rules outside the theater were written by different hands entirely. And then in the early 1950s, something happened that changed Sammy Davis Jr. forever, and planted a question that puzzled and sometimes angered the public for years afterward. Sammy Davis Jr. converted to Judaism. For a black man in mid-century America, this was not a simple personal choice. It was a statement, though Sammy himself described it as a spiritual search, a connection to a people who also knew what it meant to be persecuted, to be told they did not belong. What did that conversion mean to him, really? And how did the world respond? We'll come back to that. By the mid-1950s, Sammy Davis Jr. was a star, a genuine, undeniable star. He had survived a near-fatal car accident in 1954, an accident that cost him his left eye, and he had come back from it with what many who knew him described as a renewed sense of purpose. Biographers note that it was during his recovery that his spiritual journey deepened, and his eventual conversion to Judaism took root. He had survived the road. He had survived the accident. And now he was climbing towards something that felt, finally, like the recognition he deserved. And then came Las Vegas. The Sands Hotel was the crown jewel of the Las Vegas Strip. Frank Sinatra performed there. Dean Martin, the biggest names in American entertainment, called the Sands their stage. And Sammy Davis Jr. could perform there too. He just could not stay there. He could not gamble on the casino floor. He could not eat in the restaurant. He could not walk through the front entrance. The same hotel that put his name on the marquee would not give him a room. By many accounts from the era, Frank Sinatra, who had genuine affection for Sammy and genuine anger at segregation, made it known in no uncertain terms that if Sammy Davis Jr. was not welcome at the Sands, then neither was he. Sinatra's influence was considerable, and slowly, reluctantly, the walls began to move, not because Las Vegas had changed its heart, but because the business of keeping Sinatra happy outweighed the business of keeping Sammy out. This was the paradox of Sammy Davis Jr.'s life. He was too valuable to exclude entirely, and too black in the eyes of that world to ever be fully included. And now the question planted earlier. What about his conversion to Judaism? Those who knew him well have said that Sammy found in Judaism a framework for suffering that made sense to him. A people who had been enslaved. A people who had been told, generation after generation, that they did not belong. He reportedly said that when he read about the Jewish experience, he recognized something in it that felt like home. But the public was not always kind about it. Some in the black community felt he was turning away from his roots. Some in the Jewish community were uncertain what to make of him. And the press, as the press often did, turned a private spiritual journey into a punchline. Sammy Davis Jr. kept performing, he kept smiling, he kept giving everything he had every single night. But the third question, the one about the moment that nearly broke him, that moment was still coming. By the early 1970s, Sammy Davis Jr. had done something that stunned many of his admirers. He had publicly embraced Richard Nixon during the 1972 presidential campaign, and at a Republican National Convention, he had hugged the president on national television. For a black man in America in 1972, this was not a neutral act. By accounts from the era, the reaction was swift and brutal. Audiences booed him. Civil rights leaders condemned him. The man who had spent his entire life being told he did not belong was now being told by his own community that he had betrayed them. What had led him there? And what did it cost him? Biographers and those close to him have written that Sammy Davis Jr. had spent his entire life seeking acceptance from audiences, from the industry, from a country that kept moving the goalposts. The Nixon embrace, whatever its political dimensions, seemed to many observers to be the act of a man who had spent decades being excluded, finally reaching for a door that appeared to be open. He reportedly said in the aftermath that he had believed he could do more good from inside than from outside. Whether that was true, whether it was wisdom or wishful thinking, is something historians still debate. But here is what is not debated. The backlash was devastating. Engagements were canceled. Venues went cold. The man who had fought his entire career to be seen as more than a token, who had pushed back against segregation, who had used his friendships with powerful white men to open doors for others, was now cast in the public imagination as a sellout. And this was the cruelest irony of Sammy Davis Jr.'s life. He had been punished his whole career for being too black to be fully accepted by white America, and now he was being punished for being seen as not black enough. There was no version of the story in which Sammy Davis Jr. was simply allowed to be a man. Sammy Davis Jr. did what he always did. He went back to work. Through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, he rebuilt. The Rat Pack reunions drew enormous crowds. A new generation discovered him. And in the final years of his life, something remarkable happened. The culture began, slowly, to reckon with what it had done to him. In the late 1980, a farewell tour brought Sammy Davis Jr. back to audiences who had loved him for decades. Those who were there described something almost unbearable in its emotional weight. A man in his 60s, visibly unwell, still giving everything. Still performing with a generosity that had never dimmed, even when the world around him had been anything but generous in return. Sammy Davis Jr. passed away in May of 1990 from throat cancer. He was 64 years old, and here is the answer to the question we opened with. How does the most talented man in the room spend decades fighting just to be treated like a human being, and what does that cost him? It costs him everything. And it costs him nothing because the one thing they could never take from Sammy Davis Jr. was the performance itself. Every night, under that spotlight, he was exactly who he was, undeniable, uncontainable, free. Those who worked alongside him have recalled that Frank Sinatra once said, and accounts vary on the exact words, that Sammy Davis Jr. was the greatest entertainer he had ever seen. Not the greatest black entertainer, the greatest entertainer. It should not have taken a lifetime of injustice to earn that sentence. But for Sammy Davis Jr., that was the world he lived in, and he lit it up anyway. Memory, if you grew up watching Sammy Davis Jr., you know something that is hard to put into words. You know what it felt like to watch someone perform as if their life depended on it, because in many ways it did. Every show was a statement. Every standing ovation was a small victory in a very long war. Maybe you remember him on the Ed Sullivan Show, doing an impression that made your whole family laugh out loud. Maybe you caught him live at a theater, or watched him on a variety special with the family gathered around the television on a Saturday night, the lamps low and the room hushed. Whatever your memory is, it likely carries something beyond entertainment. It carries the feeling of witnessing someone extraordinary, someone who gave you more than you expected every single time. What do you remember most about Sammy Davis Jr.? We would love to hear your memories in the comments below. Now, did you see Sammy Davis Jr. perform? What moment of his career stays with you? If this story moved you, please subscribe to Golden Age Stories. We bring you the real stories behind the icons who shaped your world every week. Next time, we're going back to a moment that stopped the entire country in its tracks, and the performer who was right in the middle of it. We'll see you then.